A humble black maid quietly serving drinks at an opulent billionaire estate, mocked, humiliated, and laughed at by the arrogant staff who thought they owned the room, but behind the apron hides the real owner, a billionaire CEO with a secret plan, and when the truth comes out, jaws will drop, regrets will follow, and an entire estate will never be the same. Before we find out what happens next, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story is already hitting home, make sure you hit that like button. The ballroom of the Clarke estate was a universe of shimmering light and sound. Crystal chandeliers, each one the size of a small car, hung from the vaulted ceiling, scattering rainbows across the sea of guests below. Women in jewel-toned gowns that cost more than a family home drifted through the room, their laughter like the tinkling of tiny bells. Men in perfectly tailored tuxedos stood in tight circles, their voices a low, confident hum as they discussed stocks, mergers, and the state of the world they so clearly ran. The air itself seemed to vibrate with wealth, a heady mix of expensive perfume, fine champagne, and the untouchable aura of old money and new power. It was a world built on appearances, on the flawless execution of luxury, and tonight's charity gala was its grandest performance. Through this dazzling spectacle moved Vanessa Clarke, a ghost in a plain black uniform. On her shoulder, she balanced a heavy silver tray, its surface crowded with delicate champagne flutes, each filled with bubbling gold. Her movements were slow, deliberate, a quiet river flowing through a field of glittering stones. She kept her eyes down, her expression neutral, her presence designed to be felt but not seen. She was part of the machinery that made the fantasy work, a silent cog in the great gilded clock. To the guests, she was invisible, just another pair of hands ensuring their glasses were never empty. But to the staff, she was something else entirely. She was new, she was an outsider, and to the woman in charge, she was a target. Susan Whitmore, the estate's event manager, stood near the grand marble fireplace, her posture as rigid and unyielding as the stone behind her. In her 50s, with a helmet of perfectly sprayed blonde hair and a dress that screamed its expense, Susan surveyed the room, not with the pride of a creator, but with the sharp, unforgiving eye of a tyrant. This was her domain. Every polished spoon, every folded napkin, every smiling waiter was a reflection of her control, and that control had to be absolute. Her eyes, narrowed and cold, scanned the floor and landed on Vanessa. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face, a predator spotting a weakness in the herd. She waited for a lull in the conversation around her, a moment when the most ears would be listening. Then, she raised her voice, not quite shouting, but projecting it with the practiced ease of someone used to being obeyed. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at Vanessa. "Can we please get some efficiency from the help?" she called out, her tone dripping with mock exasperation. "We're trying to run a high-class event here, not a soup kitchen." A few heads turned. The staff nearby tensed. Susan wasn't finished. She looked at the small group of senior waiters and caterers beside her, a captive audience. "Honestly," she said, her voice now a conspiratorial sneer, "we should really try to keep the black help out of sight. It just lowers the tone, don't you think?" A beat of silence followed, thick and uncomfortable. Then, a nervous titter broke the tension. One of the senior waiters, a man who had worked under Susan for a decade, let out a loud, braying laugh. It was a signal, permission granted. The snickering spread through the staff like a contagion. A few guests, overhearing the remark, exchanged amused glances. One woman, her neck draped in diamonds, covered her mouth with a gloved hand to hide her smile. The humiliation was now a public sport. Susan's smirk widened into a triumphant grin. She felt the familiar rush of power, the thrill of putting someone in their place. She strode toward Vanessa, her heels clicking aggressively on the polished floor. "You," she snapped, stopping just inches from her. "You're too slow. The guests are waiting." She gestured impatiently at the tray. "Look at you creeping around like you're lost." With a flick of her wrist, she bumped Vanessa's elbow, not hard enough to spill the entire tray, but with enough force to send the champagne sloshing violently in the flutes. A few drops splashed onto the silver, clumsy too, just wonderful. Vanessa instinctively adjusted her grip, her body absorbing the jolt with a practiced stillness. She didn't flinch, she didn't gasp, she simply looked at the tray, then back at Susan, her eyes calm and unreadable. "My apologies, ma'am," she said, her voice quiet but clear. It held no anger, no fear, no hint of the storm of thoughts that lay beneath the surface. It was the voice of a servant, precisely as expected. She took a small, deferential step back, creating space, de-escalating. From across the room, a young man named Ethan Bell watched the entire exchange, his body frozen in place. He was new, just a few weeks on the job, and the raw, undisguised cruelty of the scene hit him like a physical blow. He saw the smug satisfaction on Susan's face, the nervous, complicit laughter of his new colleagues, and the impossible, quiet dignity of the woman in the maid's uniform. He felt a hot flush of shame, for himself, for everyone in the room who saw it and did nothing. The air crackled with the ugly energy of the moment, a brief, sharp tear in the fabric of the elegant fantasy. Then, just as quickly, the laughter of the guests resumed, the band struck up a new song, and the gilded clock began to tick again, as if nothing had happened at all. But something had happened. A line had been crossed, and the silent woman with the tray had seen it all. The echo of the staff's laughter still hung in the air, a poisonous residue that only some in the room could feel. For Susan Whitmore, it was the sweet sound of victory. She wasn't content with a single public jab. Her cruelty needed an encore. She took another step toward Vanessa, invading her personal space, forcing the other woman to look up at her. The power dynamic was stark, the manager in her designer dress looming over the maid in her simple, functional uniform. Susan's eyes glittered with a mean-spirited fire. She was enjoying this, drawing it out, savoring the humiliation she was inflicting. She snapped her fingers, the sound sharp and commanding, a noise one might use to summon a dog. The sound cut through the nearby chatter, drawing more eyes to the small, tense drama unfolding by the beverage station. "Ice," Susan barked, her voice low and sharp. "The ice buckets on the main table are getting low. Go and fetch more now." She didn't wait for an answer. She looked Vanessa up and down. A slow, dismissive appraisal that was meant to strip away any shred of dignity. "Honestly, I don't know why we hire people like you. Completely useless." Vanessa's expression remained a mask of calm servitude. Inside, however, she was a meticulous observer, cataloging every word, every gesture, every sneer. She registered the way Susan's lips curled in contempt, the way her body language screamed superiority. This was not a simple case of a manager having a bad day. This was a pattern. This was a sickness, and Vanessa was gathering the evidence, one painful, ugly moment at a time. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Yes, ma'am." Susan leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a venomous whisper meant only for Vanessa, but loud enough for those nearby, like Ethan, to catch. "People like you," she hissed, the words tight with prejudice, "should know your place. And your place is not here, in the main ballroom, offending the guests with your presence. It's in the back, where you belong." The final words were delivered with a quiet, final stab of malice. It was the core of her belief system, laid bare in one hateful sentence. Vanessa lowered her eyes, a gesture of submission that was pure performance. But for a split second, a flicker of something else passed through them. It wasn't anger or hurt. It was a glint of steel, a knowing light that suggested a vast, hidden depth. It was the look of a queen disguised as a pawn, fully aware of the board and the player making all the wrong moves. Susan, blinded by her own arrogance, saw only what she wanted to see, a defeated servant. A few feet away, Ethan Bell was serving champagne to a couple who were pretending not to watch the scene. His hand trembled slightly. At Susan's final remark, a glass on his tray clinked against another, the sound unnervingly loud in his own ears. He almost dropped the whole thing. He felt a wave of nausea. How could someone speak to another human being that way? He looked at the faces of the guests nearby. Some shifted their feet, their eyes darting away, their discomfort visible but passive. They were witnesses, but they were silent. Others watched with a kind of detached curiosity, as if observing a particularly dramatic scene in a play. They were entertained. No one stepped in. No one said a word. The silence of the good was just as deafening as the laughter of the cruel. Vanessa turned slowly, her movements measured and graceful despite the ugliness that had been thrown at her. She held the heavy silver tray with a steady hand, its contents now a symbol of the burden she was choosing to carry. She walked away from Susan, away from the circle of smirking staff, and headed toward the service corridor. The sound of the party, the music and the laughter, seemed to echo behind her, chasing her down the hall. But she didn't hurry. Her back was straight, her shoulders were set. The camera of her mind lingered on her calm expression, a placid lake beneath which a powerful current was moving, preparing to change the course of everything. She was not retreating, she was repositioning. The storm was not over. It hadn't even truly begun. Days earlier, the world had looked very different. The air was not filled with perfume and prejudice, but with the quiet, focused energy of corporate power. Vanessa Clarke sat not in a stuffy service corridor, but behind a sprawling mahogany desk in a corner office that overlooked the city from 40 stories up. The room was a testament to her success. The walls were adorned with modern art, the shelves with architectural awards, and the desk itself was clear, save for a sleek laptop and a single leather-bound folder. She was not wearing a maid's uniform, but a bespoke navy blue suit that spoke of quiet authority and immense wealth. This was her true skin. She was Vanessa Clarke, founder and CEO of Clarke Holdings, a real estate empire she had built from the ground up. She was a billionaire, and the opulent estate where the gala was to be held was not just a venue, it was her home. Across from her sat Marcus Thorne, her lead counsel and oldest friend. He was a man in his late 60s, with a sharp mind and eyes that had seen everything the corporate world could throw at a person. He held a tablet, his brow furrowed in concern as he swiped through a series of internal reports. "Vanessa, I have to advise against this," he said, his voice laced with genuine worry. "Going undercover as a maid, it's unorthodox, it's risky. What if someone recognizes you?" Vanessa leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful, calm expression on her face. "No one will," she stated, not with arrogance, but with a simple certainty. "The high-profile guests know my face, yes, but they see the CEO. They don't see the person, and the staff. They've been hired by a management company. Most of them have never laid eyes on me. To them, the owner is just a name on a letterhead, a phantom who never shows up." "But why?" Marcus pressed, setting the tablet down. "Why put yourself through this? We have investigators, we can handle this discreetly." Vanessa opened the folder on her desk. Inside were printouts of anonymous emails and summarized notes from hushed phone calls. "Because discreetly isn't working," she said, her voice firm. "For months I've been getting whispers. Rumors that the event manager I trusted, Susan Whitmore, is creating a toxic environment. Not just rude, Marcus, cruel. Specifically targeting minority staff members, humiliating them, making them feel worthless." She paused, her gaze turning toward the window, to the sprawling city below. "This company, this estate, it was built on a foundation of respect. I started with nothing. I know what it feels like to be overlooked, to be underestimated, to be treated as less than. I will not have that cancer growing in my own house." She looked back at him, her eyes holding his. "And it's not just the staff. There are discrepancies. Murmurs about charitable donations from these galas not being fully accounted for. Small amounts here and there, but it's a pattern. Susan controls the on-site finances for these events. If she's capable of such casual cruelty to people's faces, I need to know what she's capable of behind their backs." Marcus sighed, recognizing the unshakable resolve in her tone. He had seen it before, when she was negotiating billion-dollar deals or facing down hostile boards. Once Vanessa Clarke set her course, there was no turning her. "You want undeniable proof," he said, less a question than a statement of fact. "I want the truth," she corrected him gently. "I want to see it with my own eyes. I want to know how my people, the people I pay to uphold the values of this company, behave when they think no one in power is watching. An investigator's report is one thing. Feeling it, seeing it, that's something else. That is evidence no one can dispute." Her expression was not one of anger or a desire for revenge. It was the cool, calculating look of a strategist, a leader who understood that sometimes, to fix a problem, you had to get your hands dirty. This was about justice. It was about principle. It was about the soul of the empire she had built. "You know this could get ugly, Vanessa," the lawyer warned, his voice low. "If these rumors are true, she will not treat you well." A shadow of sadness crossed Vanessa's face, but her resolve did not waver. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I know," she said quietly, "but from the sound of it, it already has." She closed the folder, the soft click echoing in the quiet, powerful room. The decision was made. The giant was preparing to hide in plain sight. Back in the present, the echoes of the party faded as Vanessa pushed open the door to a small, private powder room reserved for management. The opulent decor of the main house was muted here, replaced by simple, clean functionality. She closed the door behind her, the latch clicking shut, sealing her in a cocoon of silence. For the first time all evening, she was alone. She leaned against the cool wood of the door, closing her eyes for a brief moment, letting the mask of the subservient maid fall away. She took a slow, deep breath, then another, steadying herself. The insults, the sneering laughter, the casual dehumanization, she had absorbed it all, letting it pass through her without leaving a visible mark, but it was a heavy burden to carry, even for a short time. She walked over to the simple, unadorned locker at the far end of the room, the one assigned to her for the night. With practiced movements she began to change. The simple black dress and the crisp white apron came off, folded neatly and placed on a bench. Underneath she wore a simple tank top and slacks. It was the uniform beneath the uniform, the clothes of a woman who was neither CEO nor servant, but simply herself. She stood for a moment in front of the small, plain mirror above the sink, looking at her own reflection. She saw the weariness in her eyes, but beneath it the unyielding fire of her purpose burned brightly. Her phone, tucked away in the locker, buzzed with a soft vibration. It was a preset calendar alert, a digital anchor to her real life. She picked it up and glanced at the screen. The notification read, "Vanessa Clarke, CEO, Clarke Holdings, owner, the Clarke Estate." It was a simple reminder, one she had set herself, a way to ground her in her true identity amidst the charade. She stared at the words, her thumb hovering over the screen. Owner. The words seemed to hang in the silent room. She owned the marble floors where she was mocked. She owned the crystal chandeliers that had witnessed her humiliation. She owned the very air Susan Whitmore breathed with such arrogant authority. Putting the phone away, she walked to the room's single window, which overlooked a quiet, manicured garden at the side of the vast estate. The moonlight painted the hedges and rose bushes in shades of silver and gray. Beyond the garden, she could see the silhouette of the main house, its windows blazing with golden light, the distant sound of the orchestra a faint, muffled pulse. She had designed this place, chosen every stone, every piece of art, every tree planted on its grounds. She had poured her ambition, her taste, and her soul into its creation. It was her sanctuary, her fortress, her legacy, and it was being poisoned from within. A wave of cold resolve washed over her, hardening her spirit. She was no longer just gathering evidence. She was preparing for battle. A quiet voice in her mind, the voice of the narrator of her own life, spoke a simple truth. "True giants don't roar," it whispered. "They don't need to. They wait. They watch. And when the time is right, they simply stand up." Meanwhile, in a bustling service kitchen filled with the clatter of plates and the shouts of chefs, Ethan Bell couldn't stop the scene from replaying in his head. He was supposed to be stacking used glasses, but his hands moved mechanically, his mind elsewhere. The sound of Susan's sneering voice, the complicit laughter of the other staff, it was an endless loop. Each time he saw the maid's calm, quiet face, a fresh wave of shame and anger washed over him. He felt like a coward. He had stood there, just a few feet away, and had done nothing. He had let his fear of losing a job he desperately needed, outweigh the basic human decency of speaking up. The compromise felt sour in his mouth, a bitter taste that no amount of water could wash away. The laughter kept ringing in his head, a mocking chorus that judged his silence. Ethan knew, with a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, that this was a moment that would stick with him, a moral crossroads he had failed to navigate. He looked around at his coworkers, who were now joking and complaining about demanding guests. The incident in the ballroom already forgotten, a piece of casual workplace cruelty that didn't even register as significant. To them it was just Susan being Susan. But to Ethan, it felt like a stain on the entire evening, on the entire estate. He looked down at his own hands, feeling a deep, unsettling sense of complicity. He had to do something. He just didn't know what. A short time later, Ethan was tasked with clearing trays from a service hallway, the same one Vanessa had retreated down earlier. He worked methodically, his thoughts still churning. As he rounded a corner, he saw her. The maid from the ballroom. She wasn't carrying a tray now. She was just standing there for a moment, near a service exit, as if gathering her thoughts before plunging back into the chaos. She was in the same simple uniform, still playing her part. This was his chance. His heart began to beat faster. It was one thing to feel bad. It was another thing to act. He debated silently, a frantic, lightning-fast war in his mind. Say something. Just tell her you're sorry for what happened. What's the worst that can happen? Susan could see you. She could fire you. But if you say nothing, you're just like them. The thought of being like the others, the ones who laughed, was more terrifying than losing his job. He took a deep breath and walked toward her. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a little shaky. "Ma'am?" Vanessa turned, her expression neutral, guarded. "Yes? I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," Ethan stammered, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "About what happened out there, with Mrs. Whitmore. That was wrong. No one should be spoken to that way." He braced himself for any reaction, dismissal, suspicion, even anger that he hadn't spoken up when it mattered. Instead, Vanessa's guarded expression softened, a genuine warmth entered her eyes, and it transformed her face. She looked at this young man, at his earnest, troubled expression, and saw a flicker of hope in the darkness of the evening. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was different now. It was not the quiet, deferential tone of the maid, but the steady, appreciative voice of a woman who recognized true character when she saw it. "That means a great deal." "I should have said something," Ethan admitted, the confession pouring out of him. "In the moment, but I froze. I'm new here, and you were afraid," Vanessa finished for him, her tone gentle and understanding, not accusing. "Fear is a powerful cage, Mr. Bell. Ethan Bell." "Mr. Bell," she continued, a small encouraging smile on her lips. "What you're doing right now, speaking to me, takes more courage than shouting in a crowded room. It's easy to be brave when there's an audience. It's much harder to do the right thing when no one is watching." She looked him directly in the eye, and he felt the force of her personality, a quiet strength that seemed to emanate from her. "Never lose that. Don't let a place like this or a person like her take that away from you. Always stand by what you know is right, even if your voice shakes." Her words landed on him like a balm, soothing his guilt but also strengthening his resolve. He felt a profound sense of connection to this woman, this stranger who had been so deeply wronged, yet showed no trace of bitterness. She wasn't just a victim, she was a leader, even in this humble disguise. He felt his own moral compass, which had been spinning wildly, finally lock into place. He nodded, his decision made. "If you need anything," he said, his voice firmer now, "if you need someone to back you up, or to say what they saw, I will. I don't care about the job." Vanessa's smile widened. She had come here looking for the worst in her people, but in the process, she had found the best. This young man's quiet courage was an unexpected gift, a crucial piece of the puzzle she hadn't even known she was looking for. "I will remember that, Ethan Bell," she said, her voice imbued with a quiet promise. "Thank you." Ethan walked away from the conversation feeling taller, his purpose clear. He would be her witness, he would watch, he would listen, and if he had to, he would speak. He would find a way to get evidence. Maybe even use his phone to record Susan, if he got the chance. His small, brave choice had set him on a new path. He was no longer a silent bystander. He was now an ally, and in the silent war being waged within the walls of the Clarke estate, he had just chosen his side. Later that night, long after the last guest had departed, and the cleanup crew had swept away the final traces of the lavish affair, Vanessa sat alone in the estate's high-tech security office. The room was a stark contrast to the opulence of the rest of the house. It was a nerve center of cool, dark surfaces and the quiet hum of technology. A bank of monitors glowed in front of her, displaying live feeds from dozens of cameras positioned discreetly throughout the property. But she wasn't watching the live feeds. She was deep in the archives. With deft, practiced clicks of a mouse, she navigated the system's timeline, her face illuminated by the cold, blue light of the screens. She had the time code of her own humiliation memorized. She pulled up the footage from the main ballroom. There it was, in grainy, silent detail. She watched as Susan pointed, as her face twisted into a cruel sneer. She watched the other staff members laugh. She saw Ethan, frozen by the beverage station, his distress clear even in the low-resolution video. She watched herself, calm and still, absorbing the abuse. Seeing it from this detached, third-person perspective didn't ignite her anger. It solidified her resolve. This was fact. This was data. This was irrefutable. But she wasn't just here to review her own ordeal. Her anonymous tipsters had mentioned a pattern. Now she would find it. She began a meticulous search, cross-referencing staff schedules with camera locations, scanning hours of footage from the past several weeks. It was a painstaking process, but Vanessa had the patience of a hunter. An hour passed, then two. The pile of evidence grew. She found it, footage from 2 weeks prior, in a service corridor. Susan Whitmore cornering a young Hispanic waitress, berating her for being a few minutes late, her face contorted with rage. Vanessa zoomed in, reading the terror and shame on the young woman's face. She kept digging. A month ago, by the loading docks, a middle-aged janitor, a Filipino man who had worked at the estate for 5 years, was being scolded by Susan for leaving a cart in the wrong place. Susan didn't just correct him, she mocked his accent, mimicking him in a high-pitched, childish voice, while another manager stood by, smiling uncomfortably but doing nothing. Another clip. A crowded staff briefing before an event. Susan, singling out a young black cleaning lady, asking her in front of everyone if she even knew what the expensive cleaning products were for, her tone implying the woman was too stupid to understand. The woman just stared at the floor, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The clips piled up, one after another, a sickening montage of casual bigotry and power abuse. It wasn't just about her, it was about all of them. Vanessa watched it all, her expression hardening from determined to glacial. The quiet sadness she had felt earlier was now replaced by a cold, clear certainty. This wasn't a management problem, this was a moral rot, and it went all the way to the core of Susan's character. The pattern was undeniable, it was systemic, it was vile, and it was happening under her roof. Her decision, already firm, now became absolute. She picked up her phone, her fingers moved swiftly across the screen, typing a short, precise text message. The recipients were a small, select group: Marcus Thorne, her lawyer, and the 2 most senior and trusted members of the Clarke Holdings Board of Directors. The message was simple, direct, and carried the weight of an earthquake. It read, "We need a meeting. The estate. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. urgent. Urgent." She hit send. The message disappeared into the ether, a digital command that would set in motion the final act. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, the glow of the monitors reflecting in her still, determined eyes. The stage was set, the evidence was gathered, the trap was ready to be sprung. The next morning, the staff room, usually a place of tired pre-shift grumbling, was buzzing with a different kind of energy. It was the energy of gossip, and Susan Whitmore was at its center, holding court. She leaned against a stainless steel counter, a cup of coffee in her hand, recounting her version of the previous night's events with theatrical flair. She was not just recounting, she was gloating. You should have seen her face, Susan said, a gleeful smile playing on her lips. That new maid, the one who moved like she was walking through mud. I finally had to put her in her place. Right in the middle of the gala. A few of the senior staff members, the same ones who had laughed the night before, chuckled appreciatively. They were her loyalists, her court jesters, their positions secured by their willingness to endorse her cruelty. "What did you say to her, Susan?" one of them asked, eager for the details. "I told her exactly what she needed to hear," Susan declared, taking a self-satisfied sip of her coffee. "That people like her don't belong in the front of the house, that she was clumsy and useless." She savored the memory, embellishing it for her audience. "I was thinking of just firing her on the spot, just for fun, to make an example of her." She laughed, a short, sharp sound that held no real humor, but then she just scurried away like a frightened mouse. Pathetic. She waved a dismissive hand. "It doesn't matter. I doubt she'll even show her face here again. And if she does, I'll have her gone by noon." Her sense of control was absolute, her arrogance a shield that made her feel invincible. She looked around the room, enjoying the mix of admiration and fear on the faces of her subordinates. This was how she liked it. "The best part is," she added, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, "the boss never comes around here anyway. This whole estate, it runs because of me. The owner is just some name on paper. They have no idea what really goes on here." Ethan, who had been quietly getting his own cup of coffee at the far end of the room, listened to Susan's bragging, and his stomach turned. The casual, joyful cruelty of it all was even more repulsive in the bright light of day. He saw the nervous glances of some of the newer staff, the ones who were too afraid to speak but who clearly felt uncomfortable. He saw the sycophantic laughter of the others, who seemed to enjoy the spectacle as much as Susan did. He made eye contact with one of the young waitresses who had been on the receiving end of Susan's tirades in the past. She quickly looked away, her eyes filled with a familiar fear. He thought of the maid from last night, of her quiet dignity and her powerful encouraging words. "Always stand by what you know is right." Susan's boastful voice faded into a dull drone as Ethan's own resolve hardened. He felt no more fear, only a cold, simmering anger. Susan thought she was untouchable. She thought no one was watching. She was about to find out just how wrong she was. He held his coffee cup, his knuckles white, and watched the petty tyrant enjoy her last few moments of power. He was a silent witness, but he knew he wouldn't be silent for much longer. Susan's victory lap was not yet over. Her ego, puffed up from her performance in the staff room, demanded another outlet. As the staff began to disperse to their morning duties, she spotted a target of opportunity. It was another waitress, a young black woman named Maya, who was carefully polishing silverware, getting it ready for a luncheon event. Maya was known for being quiet, diligent, and a little timid, which made her the perfect victim for someone like Susan. Susan strode over to Maya's station, her arms crossed, her expression already set to one of stern disapproval. "Maya," she said, her voice sharp. Maya looked up, startled, a deer-in-the-headlights look in her eyes. "Yes, Mrs. Whitmore?" "This is not how you polish silver," Susan snapped, picking up a fork and inspecting it under the light as if looking for microscopic flaws. "There's a streak here. Can you not see it? Are you doing this with your eyes closed?" "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore," Maya whispered, her hands starting to tremble slightly. "I thought I—" "You thought," Susan interrupted, her voice rising in volume. "It is not your job to think, it is your job to do as you are told, and to do it perfectly. We have standards here, in case you hadn't noticed. And you," she said, pointing the fork at Maya, "are being slow, terribly slow. At this rate the guests will be here before you've finished 3 spoons." It was a near-perfect echo of the abuse she had hurled at Vanessa the night before. The same accusations of incompetence, the same condescending tone, the same goal of making someone feel small and worthless. "Do I need to find someone else who can do this job properly?" Susan threatened, letting the words hang in the air. "Because I can. I can have you replaced in an hour. Don't think for a second that you are indispensable." Maya just stared down at the table, her shoulders hunched, fighting back tears. "No, ma'am," she mumbled. "I'll be faster." "See that you are," Susan said with a final, dismissive sniff, dropping the fork back on the table with a clatter. She turned and walked away, a smug look of satisfaction on her face. Her power trip was fully engaged, fueled by years of this kind of behavior going completely unchecked. She felt powerful, in control, the unquestioned queen of her little kingdom. The narrator of all things, the silent observer of all hearts, would have noted the profound and simple truth of the moment. Arrogance blinds even the cleverest tyrant. Susan was so focused on the small temporary power she could wield over the people in front of her that she was completely oblivious to the real, immense power that was gathering just out of sight, preparing to judge her. From a distance, hidden by the corner of a long hallway, Vanessa watched the entire exchange. She hadn't needed to see it on a security monitor this time. She had followed Susan from the staff room, predicting that the woman's inflated ego would need to assert itself again quickly. And she had been right, seeing it happen live, seeing the fresh fear and humiliation in Maya's eyes, erased any lingering shred of doubt, any thought of simple disciplinary action. This was a rot that had to be cut out completely. She watched Susan walk away, proud and untouchable in her own mind. Vanessa's face was a mask of cold, hard stone. The time for observation was over. The time for action had come. She turned, her movements swift and silent, and headed back toward her real office, the one with the mahogany desk and the view of the city. Her plan was now final. Vanessa walked into her private study within the estate, a room Susan Whitmore didn't even know existed. It was her sanctuary and her command center, a place of quiet reflection and decisive action. The anger and disgust she felt had been transmuted into a singular, clear purpose. There was no more debate, no more weighing of options. There was only the execution of a plan that was now as necessary as it was inevitable. She sat down not at the grand desk, but in a simple armchair by the window. The morning sun streamed in, illuminating the room in a calm, clear light. She didn't need to look at spreadsheets or reports. She didn't need to review the footage again. The evidence was seared into her memory. She knew what she had to do. She picked up her personal cell phone, the one that held her most important contacts. She scrolled through the list and pressed a single name, Marcus Thorne. Her lawyer answered on the first ring, his voice alert and ready. He had received her text last night. He knew something significant was about to happen. "Marcus," Vanessa said, her voice a paradigm of calm. It was not the voice of a woman seething with rage, but the voice of a CEO issuing a series of carefully considered directives. There was a chilling stillness in her tone, the quiet at the center of a hurricane. "It's time," she stated, leaving no room for discussion. "Call the emergency board members who are on their way. Inform them the meeting is non-negotiable, and the agenda is a serious breach of corporate ethics and conduct at the estate." She paused, taking a steadying breath before delivering the next, more critical instruction. "I also need you to call the bank. I want a temporary freeze placed on all discretionary accounts managed by the estate events department. Effective immediately. Susan Whitmore's corporate credit card, her signing authority, all of it. I want it shut down right now before she even arrives at the meeting." This was a tactical move, the first step in dismantling Susan's power base before she even knew she was under attack. "Consider it done," Marcus replied, his voice grim but efficient. And finally, Vanessa said, her eyes looking out at the sprawling grounds of her home, "Prepare the documents, all of them, termination papers for cause, a full severance denial based on gross misconduct, and have a security detail standing by, quietly, discreetly. I want them on site in 1 hour." Her words were like stones dropping into a still pond, each one creating a ripple that would soon grow into a tidal wave. She was calm, methodical, and utterly resolute. She was not just firing an employee. She was dismantling an empire of petty tyranny, piece by piece. She was reasserting control, not with shouting or anger, but with the quiet, unstoppable force of her authority. "Everything will be in place," Marcus assured her. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. "Good," Vanessa said, and then she hung up. The call had lasted less than a minute, but in that single minute, the fate of Susan Whitmore was sealed. The full weight of the Clarke Holdings empire, a silent, invisible giant, was now being mobilized against one arrogant, oblivious woman. Vanessa placed her phone down on the table beside her. Her work for the moment was done. All that was left was the final confrontation. The summons came via a crisp, formal email, followed by a personal request from one of the estate's top administrators. Susan Whitmore was to attend a special meeting at 9 a.m. sharp in the grand conference room on the main floor. The attendees were listed as select board members of Clarke Holdings and senior estate management. Susan read the email on her office computer, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. A meeting? On a Tuesday morning? It was an interruption. She had supplier invoices to approve and a staffing schedule for the weekend to finalize. She assumed it was some routine quarterly review, probably a tedious discussion about budgets or projected revenues. Her name was on the list as senior management, which felt right and proper to her. It didn't occur to her to be nervous. Why would it? She was Susan Whitmore. She ran this place. If anything, she thought, it was probably a meeting where they would praise her for the flawless execution of last night's gala. She might even get a bonus. The thought brought a self-satisfied smile to her face. A few minutes later, Ethan Bell received a summons of his own. It was delivered in person by the same quiet administrator. "Mr. Bell," the man said formally, "you are requested to be at the grand conference room at 9:15 a.m. Please wait outside until you are called." Ethan's heart leaped into his throat. His breath caught. This was it. It was happening. A wave of anxiety washed over him, followed by a surge of adrenaline. He was going to have to speak, in front of board members, against his boss. He thought about the maid, Vanessa, and her calm, encouraging words. "Always stand by what you know is right." He straightened his shoulders and gave a firm nod. "I'll be there," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. As the clock ticked toward 9, a quiet, nervous energy began to hum through the halls of the estate. The invited staff members began to gather outside the heavy oak doors of the conference room. There were a few other senior managers, the ones who had enabled Susan's behavior with their silence or their sycophantic laughter. They whispered among themselves, speculating about the meeting's purpose. Their faces showed confusion, a hint of worry. This felt different from a normal budget review. Then, the board members arrived. 2 men and a woman, all in immaculate business attire, their faces grim and unreadable. They walked with an air of purpose and authority that instantly silenced the staff's nervous chatter. They nodded curtly at the administrator and entered the conference room without a word. The heavy doors closed behind them, muffling all sound. The tension in the hallway ratcheted up, becoming a thick, palpable thing. Something big was happening. Everyone could feel it. Susan Whitmore, arriving last, and with an air of unbothered importance, simply assumed they were all waiting for her. She gave a confident smile and prepared to make her entrance. The heavy oak doors of the conference room swung open, and the administrator called out the names. "Susan Whitmore, the board will see you now." Susan smoothed down her dress, shot a triumphant, knowing look at the other managers, and walked in, her head held high. She expected to see the board members and her lawyer, Marcus Thorne, seated around the long, polished table, and they were there, their faces set like stone. But the room felt incomplete, expectant. There was an empty chair at the head of the table, a place of ultimate authority. Susan entered, her confidence still intact, a practiced smile on her face. "Good morning, everyone," she began, ready to launch into her report on the gala's success. "I'm pleased to say that last night was—" Her words died in her throat. At that exact moment, a side door, one that led to a private study, opened, and into the room walked Vanessa Clarke. It was not the quiet, invisible maid from the night before. This was not a woman in a simple black uniform with downcast eyes. The woman who entered the room was a lightning strike of power and presence. She wore a razor-sharp, dark gray CEO suit, tailored to perfection. Her hair was styled elegantly, and her posture radiated a level of authority that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. She walked not with the shuffle of a servant, but with the measured, confident stride of a person who owned every molecule of air, every polished floorboard, every pane of glass in the entire building. She was no longer a ghost. She was a queen reclaiming her throne. A collective gasp echoed around the room. The other managers, who had been called in after Susan, stared, their mouths literally hanging open. Their minds struggled to reconcile the image of the maid they had seen scurrying away from Susan's insults, with the formidable woman who now stood before them. Ethan, who had been asked to step inside and wait by the wall, felt his eyes go wide. A wave of understanding and awe washed over him. The calm dignity, the quiet strength. It all made sense now. The woman he had defended was the one who needed no defense at all. But the most dramatic reaction came from Susan Whitmore. A chilling stillness fell over her. The confident smile on her face didn't just fade, it shattered like a cheap piece of glass. The color drained from her face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly white. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The pen and notepad she was holding slipped from her numb fingers and clattered onto the gleaming surface of the conference table, the sound unnaturally loud in the dead, profound silence. Her mind was a maelstrom of confusion, denial, and a rapidly dawning, gut-wrenching horror. It couldn't be. It was impossible. The maid, the useless, clumsy maid, here, at the head of the table. The world tilted on its axis, and Susan Whitmore's carefully constructed reality crumbled into dust. She froze, a statue of pure, unadulterated shock. The giant had finally stood up. The silence in the room was absolute, a heavy blanket of shock and disbelief. Every eye was fixed on Vanessa as she walked calmly to the head of the long conference table and took her seat. She didn't look at Susan. Not yet. She placed her hands on the table, her posture radiating a quiet, unshakable authority. She surveyed the faces in the room, the horrified board members, the stunned managers, the awestruck Ethan, before finally letting her gaze fall upon the woman who was still frozen in a state of shock. "Good morning, Susan," Vanessa said. Her voice was calm, level, and utterly devoid of the heat of anger. It was the cold, clear voice of absolute power. "I believe we've met." Susan flinched as if she'd been struck. A strangled noise, half gasp, half whimper, escaped her lips. I don't understand," she stammered, her mind failing to process the impossible reality in front of her. Vanessa leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto Susan's. "Then allow me to make it perfectly clear," she said, her voice dropping to a lower, more serious register. "My name is Vanessa Clarke. This estate is mine. This company is mine. And for the past 48 hours, I have been working as a member of your staff." She let that statement hang in the air for a moment, letting the full weight of it sink in. "And I saw everything." With a nod to her lawyer, Marcus, the large screen on the wall behind her flickered to life. The first image to appear was a crystal-clear security feed of the ballroom from the night before. The room watched in horrified silence as the scene unfolded. They saw Susan point at Vanessa. They saw her mock her to the other staff. They heard her cruel words, amplified by the room's sound system. "We should really try to keep the black help out of sight." Susan stared at the screen, her face a mask of dawning, sickening realization. The blood drained from her face completely. The board members looked from the screen to Susan, their expressions turning from shock to utter disgust. Vanessa let the tape play. She showed the moment Susan insulted her, called her useless, and deliberately knocked the tray. Then, the footage switched. A new scene appeared, from 2 weeks prior. Susan berating the young Hispanic waitress in the hallway. Then another clip, Susan mocking the Filipino janitor's accent. And another, Susan humiliating the young cleaning lady in front of her peers. It was a highlight reel of her cruelty, a systematic documentation of her prejudice and abuse, played out for the entire leadership to see. When the final clip ended, the screen went black, plunging the room back into a heavy, damning silence. Susan was breathing in short, ragged gasps, her eyes wide with panic. She looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape route, but she was trapped by the horrified stares of everyone in the room. It was a misunderstanding," she finally managed to choke out, the words weak and pathetic. I was under a lot of stress. The gala, I didn't mean. Save it, Vanessa cut her off, her voice as sharp and clean as a surgeon's scalpel. There was no room for excuses, no possibility of a reprieve. The judgment had already been made. You meant every word. Your actions weren't a misunderstanding. They were a pattern, a reflection of your true character when you thought no one with power was watching. Vanessa looked toward the wall where Ethan was standing. Mr. Bell, she said, her voice softening slightly, would you please tell the board what you witnessed last night? Ethan stepped forward, his heart pounding but his voice clear and steady. He recounted everything he had seen and heard, Susan's initial insults, the laughter of the staff, and the final, venomous remark about people knowing their place. He spoke simply, factually, without embellishment. His honest testimony was the final nail in Susan's professional coffin. When he was finished, Vanessa turned her full attention back to Susan, who now seemed to have shrunk in her chair. Susan Whitmore, Vanessa said, her voice now carrying the formal weight of a final verdict. You have fostered a toxic environment of discrimination and disrespect within my home and my company. You have abused your position and humiliated your staff. You have violated every principle this corporation stands for. She paused, letting the weight of the indictment settle. You are fired, effective immediately. The words landed with the force of a physical blow. Susan went completely, utterly speechless. The last vestiges of her arrogance and defiance evaporated, replaced by a raw, naked look of shock, regret, and the terrifying understanding that she had single-handedly destroyed her own life. The empire she thought she ruled had been a house of cards, and the woman she had mocked as a lowly maid had just blown it all away. The aftermath was swift and clinical. Two discreet security guards who had been waiting in the hall entered the room. They approached Susan's chair with a quiet professionalism that was somehow more chilling than open aggression. "Ma'am," one of them said softly, "we'll escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings." Susan didn't resist. She seemed to be in a daze, her body moving on autopilot. As they led her out of the conference room, she didn't look at anyone, her eyes fixed on the floor. The career she had built over decades, the power she had savored, the identity she had wrapped herself in, it was all gone. She was no longer Susan Whitmore, the untouchable estate manager. She was just a woman who had been fired for cause, escorted out of the building in disgrace. Once the door closed behind her, Vanessa addressed the remaining managers in the room. Her voice was stern, but it lacked the cold finality she had used with Susan. "Let this be a lesson to all of you," she said, her gaze sweeping over their pale, frightened faces. "The staff who actively participated in Mrs. Whitmore's culture of bullying will receive formal disciplinary notices and will be placed on mandatory sensitivity training. Your careers here are on thin ice." She looked pointedly at the ones who had laughed the loudest. "As for those of you who stood by and did nothing, who were silent in the face of such ugliness, consider this your one and only warning. Silence is complicity. At Clarke Holdings we expect our leaders to have a backbone. The next time you see injustice, you will be expected to act. Is that understood?" A chorus of mumbled, terrified "Yes, Mrs. Clarke" filled the room. Then Vanessa's expression softened as she turned to Ethan, who was still standing by the wall, trying to process everything that had just happened. "Ethan Bell," she said, and a warm smile returned to her face. "You showed integrity and courage when it mattered most. You stood up for what was right, not for personal gain, but because it was the right thing to do." She paused. "That is the kind of character I want in a leadership position at this estate. Marcus will speak to you later today about a promotion to assistant manager of events, with a significant pay increase. You've earned it." Ethan was stunned into silence, his mind reeling. Assistant manager? A promotion? He had just been trying not to get fired. He managed to stammer a "Thank you, ma'am, thank you," his heart filled with a profound sense of gratitude and relief. Vanessa stood up, her authority fully re-established. She had reclaimed her room, her estate, and her company's values, not with shouting, but with quiet, decisive action. The remaining staff watched her, stunned into a new kind of silence. It was not the silence of fear, but the silence of awe, and a powerful newfound respect. The phantom owner was a phantom no longer. She was real, she was watching, and she had just proven that justice at the Clarke estate would be both swift and absolute. In the days that followed, a new order began to take shape at the Clarke estate. The fear and toxicity that had lingered under Susan's reign began to dissipate, replaced by a palpable sense of change and opportunity. Vanessa Clarke did not simply remove the problem, she began to actively heal the environment. She called an all-staff meeting in the very same ballroom where she had been humiliated. This time, she stood at a podium at the front of the room, not in a maid's uniform or a power suit, but in simple, professional attire that bridged the gap between owner and employee. She addressed them not as a distant, intimidating billionaire, but as their leader. For too long, she began, her voice resonating with sincerity, a culture has been allowed to grow here that is contrary to everything I believe in, a culture of disrespect, of bullying, and of discrimination. That ends today. She looked out at the sea of faces, from the kitchen staff to the groundskeepers to the administrative team. I am announcing a new, zero-tolerance policy for any form of harassment or discrimination. If you see it, you report it. There will be a new, anonymous system for doing so, and I promise you, every single report will be investigated by me personally. There will be no more suffering in silence. A murmur of surprise and relief went through the crowd. This was more than just a policy change, it was a promise of protection. But this is not just about punishment, Vanessa continued, her tone shifting to one of hope. It's about investment. I am proud to announce the creation of the Clarke Estate Opportunity Fund. This is a fund dedicated to staff education, professional development, and internal promotion. If you want to take a course to improve your skills, the fund will help pay for it. If you dream of moving from a waiter to a manager, or from a gardener to a horticulturalist, we will provide the training and the pathway to get there. Your growth is this company's growth. The atmosphere in the room transformed. The staff, who had once feared the management, now saw their owner as an advocate, a guardian. They saw a future for themselves at the estate that went beyond just collecting a paycheck. During the meeting, Vanessa made a point to publicly acknowledge Ethan's role in the recent events. I also want to recognize Ethan Bell, she said, asking him to stand. When faced with a difficult situation, Ethan chose to act with courage and integrity. He is a model of the character we will now celebrate and reward. Please join me in congratulating him on his promotion to assistant manager. The room erupted in genuine, enthusiastic applause. Ethan, his face flushing with pride, became an instant symbol of the new era. His courage was not just a private victory, it was now a public testament to the estate's new values. The message was clear. Decency and bravery would be rewarded here. The once fearful staff now looked at Vanessa Clarke, not just as the owner of the estate, but as its protector. The sun began to set, casting long golden rays across the perfectly manicured lawns of the Clarke estate. Vanessa stood on the grand terrace, watching the sky shift from blue to brilliant shades of orange and pink. The chaos of the past few days had settled into a new, steady rhythm. The air felt cleaner, lighter. A sense of peace had returned to her home, but it was a different kind of peace than before. It was a peace that had been fought for, earned through a difficult and necessary trial. The narrator, the timeless voice that sees the heart of all stories, would conclude that power isn't loud. It isn't found in the sharp command or the cruel insult. True power is steady. It is the quiet resolve of a leader who is willing to walk among her people to understand their truth. It is the unshakable foundation of principle that supports an entire enterprise. The maid they mocked, the woman they thought was invisible, owned the keys to the entire kingdom. She had the power to tear it all down, but she chose to build it up, to make it better, stronger, and more just than it had been before. And the story holds a second, equally important moral. Those who are blinded by prejudice, who judge others based on a uniform, an accent, or the color of their skin, often see the truth far too late. They build their world on a fragile foundation of arrogance, and they are always shocked when it comes toppling down. Susan Whitmore saw a servant to be belittled. She failed to see the giant who was taking her measure. Vanessa watched the last sliver of sun dip below the horizon. A deep sense of contentment washed over her. She was not just a billionaire standing alone in her vast mansion. She was a guardian, a protector of the dignity of every person who worked under her roof. She had faced the ugliness in her own house and had restored its soul. And in the quiet twilight, the magnificent estate seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, finally at peace, finally whole once more. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.